Welcome to today's episode of the Home Movers Coach. Today we're going to be talking about exchange of contracts. Now, if you've sold or bought a property in the past, or you're in that process now, you'll probably know that exchange of contracts is really important, but you might not understand exactly what it means, how it happens, or why it has to happen in a certain way. So today I'm going to talk to you about exactly that. How do you do an exchange of contracts? What's involved in that? Now, let's start with the basics. What exactly is exchange of contracts? Well, in simple terms, it is exactly what it says, an exchange of the contracts that each party has signed with each other. Okay, that is then deemed to be legally binding, and at that point, neither party can withdraw from the transaction without some cost or fine involved. From a buyer's perspective, that normally means a loss of their deposit. From a seller's perspective, it means that they will probably be liable for costs that the buyer has incurred. So it's actually a really important part of it, and it's when you can feel secure. Before that point, either party can withdraw, as anyone who's been involved in an abortive transaction will know, without any recourse to funding or giving the other side any monetary compensation. So what exactly has to happen? Well, we talked about the original days. Exchange was two contracts being sent to each solicitors for signature by the other parties. What we do nowadays, of course, is, have done for many years, is a telephone exchange, which is where the two solicitors get on the telephone and basically confirm that they are in possession of identical contracts that say exactly the same thing, signed by their respective clients, and also they confirm a completion date, which is normally some point in advance, maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever it might be. That is then deemed to be a legal exchange of contracts leading to a completion. It means that even if for some reason the physical contracts are not countersigned by the other parties, the exchange has still taken place and completion will still go forward. So it's a really important timescale. Now, of course, solicitors have to get to that point, and they have to make sure that the other solicitor is ready. That becomes more complicated, of course, if there are numerous transactions involved in a chain, for example. It's much more easy if there's just one transaction, a buyer and a seller ready to go, and that can be done quite straightforwardly. What they actually have to do is created, or it's been created, if you like, by the Law Society, a formula. And there's 3 formulas that exist, and they're very simply just ways of the solicitors understanding exactly what is happening. So it's an agreement between solicitors to know what process they're going to follow. We'll deal with them very quickly. Formula A, least used one, it actually exists for where one of the solicitors holds both of the contracts, or a single contract with both signatures on, and the other solicitor, acting for the seller or the purchaser, basically agrees that they are able to exchange contracts. This is very rare. That isn't something that happens that often. Formula B and C are the most common ones that you'll come across, and you probably won't know which one your solicitor is using, but there's a simple difference between the two. The principles are the same. Both parties have to agree that the contracts they've got in their possession are accurate and identical, but the difference is that Formula B relates to this where there's one transaction only, just a seller and a buyer buying or selling a property, and that's maybe a straightforward transaction. And Formula C relates to multiple transactions in a chain that we're familiar with. The subtle difference between the two is quite simply that on Formula B, when the exchange of contracts takes place, that is it is done and legally binding. When on a Formula C, the property at the bottom of the chain, the buyer solicitors speak to the seller solicitors there, they agree the exchange of contracts with a time period attached to it. That time period allows the next solicitor up to go up and speak to the following solicitor, and so on and so on. If those time limits expire, then the exchange has not taken place, but if they don't expire and everybody is in a position to go forward, then the exchange takes place as planned. So that can go over more than one day. It normally tries to happen in the same day, but in theory, that can actually take more than a number of days to get to that point. It depends what they've agreed in terms of the time limits. So what actually happens when you've exchanged contracts? We say the most important thing is you've got to agree a completion date, and that completion date is fixed unless, again, all parties agree to changing it. So the solicitors acting for the buyers have to make sure that they're in funds, that they have the money available. So they'll ask for a deposit from you if you're a buyer. That may be 10% or it may be a lesser amount depending on the circumstances, but that again has to be agreed or pre-agreed. Bear in mind that if you do put a smaller percentage forward, within the contracts it will probably state that you are liable for 10%. So if you were to default on your purchase, you may have only put 5% forward, but the seller's side will be able to come to you for the remaining balance. So just be very aware that it doesn't matter what amount you're putting forward as real money, it's what you've actually agreed to in the contract that is going to be relevant. From a seller's side, obviously you don't put a deposit forward, but you are agreeing and legally committed to that sale, and you can and probably would be sued if you tried to get out of it. So it's really important that everybody understands exactly what they've got to do. The solicitors, in order to exchange, need to make sure that the funds are there available. So they need to make sure that you've got your portion of the funds available. They also need to make sure that if you're getting a mortgage, that the lenders are able to release the mortgage money on the respective completion date. Having got all that together, they're then in a position to go forward and exchange contracts. And that is hopefully it. You're then secure, you're safe in the knowledge that the deal is going to happen. And the chances of it falling through after exchange of contracts are very, very small. I mean, in the 35 years that I worked as an agent, I had none that failed to go through. I only ever had one that actually didn't happen on the date that completion had been set for. It's a different topic, and that was solved within a week or so anyway. So the only other aspect that you need to consider is how long between exchange and completion. That has to be agreed with everybody because it's the moving day for most of you. If you're not living in the property or you have other accommodation to live in whilst the deal is going through, then obviously you don't have to physically move in or out of the property on that particular day. Completion has to take place on a working day. That means not bank holidays and not weekends. So that's Monday to Friday within normal working hours. Now that would be anything probably from about 9:30 in the morning through to about 5 o'clock in the evening. The reason that is fixed and has been for many years is because the transfer of money goes via the banking system, and the banks by and large traditionally work Monday to Friday. So you can't be asking for a completion on a Saturday or a Sunday. You're not going to get that. So be aware of that before you start putting dates through that are inappropriate. The amount of time between exchange and completion can be as long or as short as you want. There is a very sort of common occurrence nowadays with simultaneous exchange and completions, which I'll talk about in a separate video because I have my own opinions on that and the merits of doing that. But it is something you may well come across and may be asked to agree to. But in simple terms, get to the exchange of contracts, get yourself secure, and make sure that you've then got the time to organise your removals and all your utilities and changing your Sky or Virgin package or whatever it might be, and getting everything organised for the day when you're going to be moving out of your current home into your next property. One question I do get asked, and let's finally finish with that, is if you're in a chain, do we all have to exchange and complete on the same day? Well, certainly you don't have to exchange on the same date, although finding a solicitor who would agree to you, in effect, breaking the chain will be quite difficult. They have an obligation to you to make sure that you fully understand the legal implications. So breaking the chain might seem a way of getting through an impasse, but actually just be very careful that you're not putting yourself in a position. If, for example, you are selling a property and you're reliant on moving to your next home and you decide to exchange with your buyer on a certain date with a completion set, and then for some reason the property you're hoping to move to falls through or doesn't happen when it needs to, then you are going to be homeless. Let's put it quite simply, or you're going to have to be finding somewhere else to live because the deal that you've done with your buyer will be fixed and will have to happen. So be aware that the logistics of getting everything in place is why sometimes it takes solicitors quite a while. If you can just imagine, they've got to have all these balls in the air, juggling at the same time, and all the other transactions they're dealing with. It's not surprising that things can take longer than anticipated or what you'd hope for. Okay, so that's basically in a nutshell what exchange of contracts is, the legally binding point where you all need to get to. That's how it works basically. And as I said, on a separate video, which you're more than welcome to click the text in the text below and link to that, we'll talk about simultaneous exchange and completions and my thoughts on why it may not be the best way forward for you. Anyway, till next time, thanks for watching. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.